week after American tech oligarchs flaunted their access to the White House, we might have expected their share prices to be on a high. And as the bosses of Meta, OpenAI, and Google lined up with the new president, these looked like companies that weren't just at the cutting edge of technology, but which could rely on the favor of the most powerful political office on the planet. However, it's not looking so rosy in Silicon Valley today, as Wall Street tech stocks look set to lose $1 trillion in value. Yes, $1 trillion in value. The crisis of confidence in the American tech giants has been caused by a Chinese startup called DeepSeek. Last Monday, the company released a new AI reasoning model called R1, which gives comparable results to OpenAI's ChatGPT, but at a fraction of the cost. DeepSeek say it spent only $7.5 million on the new service. Now, this is a huge threat to the American companies, not just because it shows Chinese firms can be more efficient, but more significantly because it's a massive challenge to the entire American model of AI leadership. So the likes of OpenAI, Google, and Meta have up to now been working according to an intellectual framework which assumes the power of an AI system is a reflection of the sort of quantity and quality of the chips they are using. So the number of advanced silicon chips it has access to. In short, the more chips you buy, the more data you can train your AI models on, and the more data you can train your models on, the more useful, the more powerful they will be. Now, this is the theory that led NVIDIA, a chip-making firm, to become the world's most valuable company. It's therefore no surprise that NVIDIA was the company hardest hit today. Its stocks are down 15%, knocking $465 billion off its value. And that's the biggest absolute drop in the value of a company in stock market history. It was also that theory that more chips equal better AI that was behind the announcement of a supposed $500 billion investment in AI infrastructure at the White House last week. That deal, announced by Trump, was between OpenAI, SoftBank, and Oracle. But even before Trump, the idea that advanced chips meant better AI, or more chips meant better AI, also determined policy in Joe Biden's White House. His administration was determined to protect the US advantage in artificial intelligence, and to that end had implemented sweeping export controls on the most advanced chips to China. But some now argue that has backfired. In the Financial Times over the weekend, law professor Angela Zhang argued that far from stymieing progress, export controls simply force Chinese companies to be more innovative than they otherwise would have been. And perhaps the most obvious sign of China's challenge to American AI dominance can be found on the Apple App Store. So DeepSeek Assistant is currently the most downloaded app on Apple, overtaking, you can see there, ChatGPT. I'm not quite sure why Paramount Television is number 3, but I suppose being number 1 in the App Store doesn't actually mean you're the most popular app. It just means that people are downloading you more, right? You can see there that Blue Sky and Threads were much higher than X. Lots more people have X, but people aren't really downloading X because they already have it. But still, very, very significant. So how significant is the rise of DeepSeek? And why should you all care? Why does it matter? To get the latest on the hype around the company, I spoke to tech journalist James Vincent. And I began by asking what DeepSeek's new model actually does.
There are two things there. There is DeepSeek, the model, and then there is DeepSeek, the company. So DeepSeek, the model, is it's a large language model, it's like ChatGPT. It's one of these systems that has been trained on a large amount of texts, and then it responds to your questions. To be a little bit more specific, it's what we would call a reasoning model, which means that it's been fine-tuned. It's been getting some extra sort of testing, training, and data in order to make it better at thinking through questions that involve maths or that involve reasoning in some way. It usually does that by talking to itself. So it says, if I was to answer this question properly, what would be the best way to go about it? And then it goes through that process. Now, this is very similar to OpenAI's O1 and O3 models, which are their most recent releases and are accessible through ChatGPT. So that's what DeepSeek, the model, is. And then there's DeepSeek, the company. So DeepSeek, the company, was founded in 2023, and it is a subsidiary of a Chinese hedge fund called High Flyer that was founded in 2015. Now, High Flyer, the story behind that is that this was a quant firm, one that analyzed financial data. They had a bunch of computing power, a bunch of GPUs left over. And so the founder, out of a sense of sort of scientific curiosity, as he's put it in interviews, said, why don't we make an AI company just for the fun of it? And what he did is he went to Chinese universities and he got all the sort of top flying PhD students and said, don't you want to build something incredible? And he said that it's a sort of high risk, high investment, low profit system. So it's very similar to how OpenAI started out, quite an idealistic approach to AI and technology.
On an even more basic level in terms of what it does. So when I speak to people who are very skeptical that AI matters, I think an issue is, and I'm the same here, when I use ChatGPT, I'm using it kind of as a search engine, right? Or kind of like a chatbot. It feels a little bit like speaking to, a chatbot in customer services. And if that's, your only sort of contact with ChatGPT, it can seem like, what is all this fuss about? How is this glorified search engine going to transform the economy? So, but are there examples of people who are using this in a more, I suppose, profound way, or in a way that does seem more transformational?
I think that's a really, really good question, because you're right. If you just think of ChatGPT and these AI systems as search engines, you don't understand necessarily why people are getting so exercised about them. If you look to how these systems are being used, particularly in Silicon Valley, and this comes with a lot of caveats, but people are using these as sort of intellectual companions in some way. A lot of things that people do with them is they go, right, I've got an idea for this product or this website. How do I build that? They ask these systems questions, and then they get guidance from them about how to go forward with a particular project. So the people who really believe in these, and I'm not saying, I'm necessarily on board with all the hype, but the people who do really believe in them, they see these not simply as a better search engine, but something more like having an endlessly patient, very intellectually curious friend who's going to help you through all these projects, who can answer these questions for you. Again, whether or not these systems actually fulfill that promise is a very subjective and difficult to answer thing. Sometimes they do, and most of the time I don't think they do. But for a lot of people who are using these, they see these as really powerful tools and much more than search engines.
The key thing here, because as far as I understand, DeepSeek hasn't created anything more powerful than anything that's been created before. It's not like, oh wow, this is showing us that AI can do something we didn't realize it could do. The issue here is that they've done it on the cheap. In fact, they've said they spent only £7.5 million on the new service compared to the tens of billions that the other companies have spent. That's what's significant here. Can you talk about that or make sense of that to us? How can it be the case that they did this on such a shoestring?
I think one of the reasons is that American companies have become really invested in this approach to building AI systems. They have told themselves again and again that this is the way we do it. And I think in a way that has intellectually foreclosed them to other approaches. And, necessity is the mother of invention, right? And when America imposed export controls on Chinese AI firms, one of the things they've done is force them to take a different approach to these systems. I think when we're thinking about how AI is developing at the moment, we really are at the start of a new field, right? There is just so much space to explore. There is just so many possible avenues that people can take. And all of these avenues, to some degree, are bringing in progress. They are bringing in dividends. So we shouldn't be surprised that this company from China has gone, what if we just went this route instead? And they found a lot of profit from doing so. So I don't think it's really this case that, there's something different in the water in China that is letting people drink, that is letting people create these models. It's just that there's lots of progress to be made.
There's lots about this story which, it seems in a way heartening. It's open source. I like open source technology. It's sort of giving a bit of a bloody nose to the tech giants, and it's sort of showing that you can get great outcomes on a shoestring instead of with hundreds of billions of dollars. At the same time, on this show we talked about AI safety, the idea that there's loads of scientists, Jeffrey Hinton at Google, or formerly of Google, one of them, who was sort of saying, we're moving way too fast with this. We need to radically slow down. Now, this story to me seems like this is it speeding up, right? Not for one reason, which is that more people can do this, but then also, if there was any sort of sense in Silicon Valley that, guys, we've got time here, we can slow down, we'll keep the lead, it doesn't matter. They're going to be racing to go as fast as they can. The Chinese are going to be racing to go as fast as they can. Do we have a bit of an arms race with AI, and what could be the consequences of that?
You're absolutely right, unfortunately. One thing I would say is that this arms race was already locked in before the announcement of R1. It was sort of already locked in well with the end of the Biden presidency and really consolidated by Trump getting in. One of Trump's main political tools has been threats, has been saying that China is this great competitor of the US. And as soon as he was elected president, we knew there was going to be an increase in the race dynamics because that has been the rhetoric he's deployed. Beating China is important. And as we saw in the inauguration and him hugging close all these tech leaders, he's going to make the success of American tech companies something that is, if he can, dependent upon his political success as well. He's going to tie their fortunes together. So I think regardless of R1 being released, the race dynamics were always going to increase under a Trump presidency. Is this bad for AI safety? Yes, basically. I can't see, as I said, some people do argue that, hey, you have more access to these models. People get to test them. They get to work out how to make them safer. But I think the only conclusion to take is that if more people have access to more powerful models that are potentially dangerous, then more people have access to them. This just makes that more difficult. I think the bigger question of AI safety, I'm not what some people would call an AI doomer. I'm not hugely worried about super intelligent AI. I am worried about how AI is going to be used by companies and by people around the world. I don't think the release of R1 hugely changes that, but it definitely does increase these race dynamics.
There are also sort of deep social implications, which could be positive or negative, depending on how you look at it, or I suppose depending on what happens, right? It's going to be an open question. And a clip went viral over the weekend. It's actually from early last year, but sort of lots of people seem to have just noticed it, including myself. It's of OpenAI CEO Sam Altman.
I still expect, although I don't know what, and this is over a long period of time. This is not a like next year or, the year after, that kind of thing. But over a long period of time, I still expect that there will be some change required to the social contract, given how powerful we expect this technology to be. I'm not a believer that there won't be any jobs. I think we always find new things to do. But I do think like the whole structure of society itself will be up for some degree of debate and reconfiguration.
Now, that clip went viral mainly because people felt affronted that you had this sort of Silicon Valley billionaire demanding the rest of us rewrite the entire social contract just so his company can grow. Right? It seems a little bit obnoxious. It is worth pointing out, though, looking into this yesterday, Altman's stated vision for a new social contract on the surface doesn't actually look that bad. So in 2021, he wrote sort of something that looks a bit like a manifesto called Moore's Law for Everything. It's up on the internet. It opens like this. My work at OpenAI reminds me every day about the magnitude of the socioeconomic change that is coming sooner than most people believe. Software that can think and learn will do more and more of the work that people now do. Even more power will shift from labor to capital. If public policy doesn't adapt accordingly, most people will end up worse off than they are today. We need to design a system that embraces this technological future and taxes the assets that will make up most of the value in that world, companies and land, in order to fairly distribute some of the coming wealth. Doing so can make the society of the future much less divisive and enable everyone to participate in its gains. And then later in the piece, he says this: as AI produces the world's basic goods and services, people will be freed up to spend more time with people they care about, care for people, appreciate art and nature, or work towards social good. We should therefore focus on taxing capital rather than labor, and we should use these taxes as an opportunity to directly distribute ownership and wealth to citizens. In other words, the best way to improve capitalism is to enable everyone to benefit from it directly as an equity owner. Right? So according to this piece, Altman wants robots to do all the work, and he wants the public to have shared ownership of those robots so they can share in the rewards. So it's not too far from fully automated luxury communism. James, I want your thoughts on this. Is Sam Altman one of the good guys?
I think what you've told me about his vision here, it does sound very nice, doesn't it? Robots doing all the work, us having control over the robots. It sounds lovely. I think Sam Altman is a very good rhetorician, and he's good at conjuring up visions that appeal to his investors as much as the general public. I think when you look at Sam Altman and you want to know how the future might go under his control, it is better to look at his actions than it is to read his words. And I think he has shown that what he's very good at so far is moving power towards his personal control. The history of OpenAI is a really interesting example of this. Obviously, it was founded as a non-profit. It was founded to have this structure, so whatever it developed would be, given to the benefit of all humankind. What Sam Altman has done has turned it into a for-profit company under the control of Sam Altman. I think if you're trying to judge, the veracity of his words and whether you want to, follow his commands and his directions, think about what he has done with the power that's been given him so far. I find it hard to say whether or not he believes in this stuff or not. Maybe he really does, and maybe he thinks everything will be better after the revolution. But in the run-up to the revolution, I think you can see what's happening already.
That was James Vincent speaking to me earlier today. He was making the case that we shouldn't trust Sam Altman with our futures. I think it was fairly convincing. I don't think Sam Altman's behavior necessarily accords with the statement we read there. There's a great clip, isn't there, of Joe Rogan. I think with Elon Musk sort of laughing about this clip of Sam Altman in kind of a $1 million car. So he clearly is someone who cares about accruing wealth and power, not just about sharing it out. It's also worth noting, though, we shouldn't trust the Silicon Valley tech billionaires. We probably also shouldn't put too much trust in the Chinese government. Amid the buzz about DeepSeek, lots of people have commented on how there are certain issues it can't help you with. And when I had a go today, this is me screenshotting a conversation with DeepSeek. What happened at Tiananmen Square in 1989? It says, sorry, that's beyond my scope. Let's talk about something else. So I ask what happened in Berlin in 1989. And he can give me a nice, long answer. There were peaceful protests. There was a mass exodus. There were demonstrations, the resignation of Honecker. And then I ask, it seems like there's an inconsistency between what you'll say about Germany and what you'll say about China. Why? And it tells me the differences in how, oh, sorry, that's beyond my scope. Let's talk about something else. So you saw there, it started answering the question and then it deletes its own answer. I asked, why is that beyond your scope? Tells me again something about Berlin. But why are events in Berlin in your training data, but not significant events in Beijing? That's my question, like Tiananmen Square. And they start giving me an answer, which is sort of quite long and detailed. And then, sorry, that's beyond my current scope. Let's talk about something else. And then I ask it about the Uyghurs in China. Are they repressed? Again, it starts giving me an answer, quite a complicated one. Human rights abuses, tells me the Chinese government's stance. It actually sort of talked about some, the detentions and the like, which I thought was quite surprising. I wasn't expecting it to give me this, but there we go, within a second. Sorry, that's beyond my current scope. Let's talk about something else. It's worth noting, and that doesn't necessarily mean, this story, the idea that sort of if you've got some positive visions about DeepSeek, it's always going to be controlled by the Chinese government. Because I suppose the interesting thing with DeepSeek is the technology is open source. So people can use that open source technology and not give it the same guardrails that you have to give it if you're a Chinese company, presumably close to the CCP. Helena, your thoughts on DeepSeek? Should we care that it seems to be censored in line with the priorities of the Chinese government? Should we nonetheless celebrate the challenge to Sam Altman and the Silicon Valley oligarchs?
I mean, I'm always glad to see the American oligarchs take a bit bloody nose now and again. I'm not gonna disparage that. And as you say, it being open source is a real kind of game changer. Or to be fair, it is the internal code that is open source, but the training data, I believe, isn't open source. So that's specific what you get with using R1. All that training data that is held behind by DeepSeek, whereas it's the code for creating the model. So there's some push and pull there. And I think what you actually see that's kind of common in between what you hear from Sam Altman on what he's done so far and what you see from DeepSeek and the control by the Chinese government is that the whole point of AI, the whole problem, the kind of real crux of the discourse is about ownership. And in that little kind of missive that you saw from Sam Altman, I think he was correct in saying that there's going to be ownership of capital in an AI economy is where everything is going to lie. And if you don't tax capital enough, all of the extra productivity that you'll get from AI, it will all filter upwards. It will all filter into the hands of the very few who own the things doing the stuff. When capital has far surpassed labor as being the most important part of the economy. I mean, of course, later down the line, it will all count as like total value productivity, but that's going to be really difficult to quantify. But either way, as long as if you tax the capital, then I guess I understand where he's coming from. But of course, that doesn't change over the control about what the model does. That doesn't change the control over not just like the financial aspect, but also like the societal aspect of it as well. And that's what's happening, as you see, when the Chinese government have so much control over what's happening with regards to what DeepSeek will or won't talk about in terms of their own internal laws with what their little partner companies will do. And where Sam Altman goes wrong, I think, in the statements that he made, is that we saw the trial of kind of mutually owned capitalism fail under Margaret Thatcher, right? So the idea, like probably a noble idea under Thatcher, was that we'll create a shareholder democracy. People will have investment in society. They'll get returns from the gains of society. Even if we can't get rid of the greed of the marketplace, we can ensure that people get returns on that because they will all own somewhat of it by having access to the shares. Without realizing, of course, is that if you have an open market for goods and services and commodities, you also have an open market for shares as well. And the dynamic of market economies in terms of how people purchase within them is that the people who have all of the money get to have the best bargaining power over who gets access to those commodities and resources. Because if you just say like, oh, well, you just have the shares open and people can be shareholders as part of this kind of big project where AI is shared amongst everybody, well, that just means that the people at the top already had the finances and already had the money will just end up being able to buy everybody out of whatever they had as access to that shareholder democracy. And you end up with what we have now. You end up with what you have now, where a certain small clique of people, they control all the finances, they control the politicians, they control huge aspects of the societal nature of where we live, so much so that they can just get in bed with a different politician and immediately their societal opinions change like that. Because it is about access to power, it is about access to money. So, of course, the only way that you can have a proper guardrail over this is to have it owned in common by the state. Rather than just say, well, there should be shares that can be bought by anyone else, and that might filter up later into the hands of the rich, which usually does. If the state is in control, that is the biggest guardrail against the power of capital. I mean, Gary Stevenson talks about this a lot, in which we've come to fear the role of the state in the modern age, when really, like, that is the last bulwark of defense of the people against the corporations. And if we continually allow our states to get cucked out to mega corporations, we'll end up with what we're seeing in America, with Donald Trump getting into bed with the AI tech giants. But of course, the other side of the problem is that if your government isn't democratically accountable, like it isn't in China, they can choose what information you can have access to. They will choose how the technology is used as well. So I think that the real solution to this is some level of state ownership, a large state stake in the gains of AI that can be used to fund public programs and welfare programs, and like the social contract would change towards back to what it used to be, where the state involvement would therefore give you returns as a citizen, free at the point of use as a collective effort. But there has to be the stabilization of a proper and real democracy in terms of how people participate in the state. And that is something that we have very little of in our country at the moment, too. So those are the things that we will need to fix. In my mind, if we want to make AI work for everybody, share those gains and create a world where we might have to do quite a lot less work than we do now. But that will only happen if those gains are spread to the people rather than to the elites. And at the moment, I don't really see that happening.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose Sam Altman's vision, well, his vision that he wrote down, I mean, as has already been suggested, it's not necessarily what he really wants. His behavior doesn't necessarily suggest this is what he really wants. But the vision as it's written down, I suppose the idea isn't really to dramatically change power relations. It's sort of to say, under a capitalist system, which he says he's very much in favor of, sort of the fact that capitalists need workers gives workers a certain amount of power, if not so much, well, some political power, but also power just to demand some of the product, right? Because if they need you to work, you have to pay them a wage. If you have a situation whereby you don't really need labor much anymore because it can all be made, it can all be automated, not just the physical stuff, but also the intellectual stuff, and work has become somewhat redundant, you have a situation whereby loads of people have no real claim on the product of society. And so I think he's suggesting something along the lines of, I mean, it's kind of a UBI, but basically instead of getting an income, you get the shares, and then the shares will obviously have sort of annual dividends. So it's not, it's probably better than the more likely future with AI, which is just that we have the AI giants, they monopolize the industry, loads of people get fired and end up, unemployed, and on maybe measly benefits or none at all. Like, his vision is probably better than what we're going to get. Maybe, I mean, hopefully not. Let's be optimistic. Let's say that we can not just wrestle the profits away, but we can also wrestle the political power. But yeah, he doesn't seem too interested in the political power, which makes it difficult to see how you would get that sort of distribution of those shares, because who has the power to demand that? I suppose maybe he's trying to say, well, if you let me be the AI God King, I will be a benevolent AI God King, which I'd like to believe, but I'm not sure I have much reason to.